Record.
Record. Awesome.
Hello, Knarrative Nubia family. I'm here today with my collaborator, Maria Judice, and we are continuing with the 10th and final film of the 10 films in 10 decades. And today's film that we're going to be in discussion about is Cheryl Dunye's Watermelon Woman. So Maria, why is Watermelon Woman on this list?
Well, thank you for asking there. Watermelon Woman by Cheryl Dunye, 1996. If you were alive in 1996, you just happened to be a part of one of the greatest eras of hip hop, of music, of Afrocentricity, of Black culture, pop culture, and also very deep seated roots in Afrocentricity or African culture. And we get all of this in Watermelon Woman. We have one of the first out lesbian feature films with Watermelon Woman. We have one of the first lesbian feature films that showcases a dark-skinned Black woman as the lead character. It's also directed by a Black woman who is of Liberian and African-American, particularly from Philadelphia heritage. We get to be in Philly for 100 or 96 minutes or whatever the length of the film is. And then also we have one of kind of like, if you have been with us here on this whole series, we get to see this kind of like masterful experimentation that Black filmmakers have. And again, in Watermelon Woman, we have this masterful experimentation of documentary and narrative, of storylines coming together. So I always like to say that this film is a film within a film within a film, because I'm sure people know Seinfeld and they know things like Direct Address, and they've seen all the Office episodes where people talk in the camera, but Watermelon Woman is doing that way before any of that stuff came out. So we have her having a pretty structured narrative about a young student filmmaker who wants to do a feature documentary on, a research subject that she has discovered about a particular Black woman actress who is lesbian from the early 1930s and who doesn't get credited by anything other than called the Watermelon Woman. And so the main narrative is her looking for this more information about this woman and trying to figure out who she is. And then we have the whole meta narrative, which is going inside and really seeing the documentary. It's a fictional documentary, which makes that a little bit weird, but it really is encompassing a bunch of actresses that were from this time that weren't credited on these films before. But we have this meta narrative, and then we have this outside narrative too, where she constantly is looking towards outside of the frame and like talking to, and like weird things that happen in really small clips with like dancing and weird police brutality scenes. But it's like three narratives in one, if that makes sense.
And I just want to say about the Black women not being credited, that's not some in the past thing. One of the parts of my career as an artist that led me to becoming more of a filmmaker was getting to that point where I would jokingly say I was getting hired as one of the props that eats. Like I had gotten so good at what I was doing that they knew I was good, but they weren't ever going to like make me a star, because let's be clear, they make people stars because I wasn't going to ever go along with the narrative. But I described it as offering me jobs to see if I could be trained. As Dr. Carr calls it, they recruit you, enlist you, ignore you, try to destroy you. So I would get to the point where I was offered a part in the pilot of Katie Keene to play a role called The Busker. And we told them that, and I had to sing a song with the lead in it. And we said we would take it if they gave the character a name. I got asked to be in Madam Secretary, I was actually a character in Madam Secretary at one point in time. I was like the Vice Secretary of African Affairs, and I assumed that meant I would get to work a lot and they'd go to the African continent with 64 nations. But actually, I only worked like twice in 4 years. And then one day they called my agent and said, we need Tonya to be in the background of a scene. I'm like, background of a scene? Like, they're like, we just need her strength in the presence of the scene. And we'll pay her, a lot more than an extra. They weren't going to pay me the rate of being a guest star, but they were going to pay me a lot of money to say no lines, right? When I get to the set, I find that I'm saying no lines sitting in the chair of the lead character, Madam Secretary. So they're asking me to be an extra as the title character on the show. And so then I began to think, let's see how colonization, they loop you in. I start thinking like, oh, if they get a new season, I will get to be Madam Secretary. Whoa, that could be like really awesome. I did get to be Madam Secretary. I was not hired as a what do you call it? A contract role. I was not hired as a recurring role. I was just hired as like a prop that eats, because as Madam Secretary, I had less to do than I had when I was just a recurring as the Vice Secretary of the show. So I wanted to make that statement to show that this is not what was happening with Faye. Was it Faye Butler? Was that her name? I think. What was happening?
Faye Richards.
Faye Richards. What was happening with Faye Richards in the 30s is still happening today. And, like we caught it on Katie King, but the way they brought it to us in Madam Secretary was like asking us to do them a favor. And then that favor, I had already established that I was willing to do it. What was that thing they say, the joke, a man is in an elevator with a woman and he says, would you sleep with me for $1 million? And she's like, no, would you sleep with me for $50? And she says, hell no. And he says, would you sleep with me for $1 million? She's like, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, how about 200? He's like, what do you think? I'm a whore? Well, we've already established that. Now we're just negotiating. So they had established that they could get me as an extra by asking me to just do them a solid and come in and be a favor. And then they just extended that to making me an extra as the title character on the show for the remainder of that title season.
Right. And we'll stay here just for a little bit, because I think there's a lot to say around the just amazing foresight that, and also research, because she's a student. Actually, Cheryl Danye at the time is a student. I forget, at Emerson. I could be wrong.
Temple. I feel like it's Temple.
At Temple. Thank you so much. At Temple. And so she's going back and forth doing this research just about, this early period of Black cinema, and particularly interested in finding lesbian or queer gay characters within this place of cinema. And then she starts to discover this thing, right? And this is a thing that we might have kind of felt when we watched Stormy Weather, where it was like, oh, you got a lot of Black people on this screen. How many of them get credit, and where do they get credit? Do they get top billing, right? Like, and then after a while, after those, 5 or 6 names that we know, because that is a Black film, Stormy Weather, and Cheryl Danye is particularly interested in researching race films, which is what Stormy Weather is. She's starting to see, like, after, those couple big people that we all know and love are on the billing, everybody else is just a busker or cookie girl or watermelon woman or whatever it is. And so again, as we talked about during Stormy Weather, and we talked about Imitation of Life, how much of the segregation existed within filmmaking, and it doesn't go away, is what Tonya is really telling us, right? Like, we have just found other ways to code this segregation without it being coded segregation. We have found new language and new ways to segregate Black folks within cinema, and then movie, and within the money in the industry and the legacy, right? Like, that's the hugest piece.
And that takes me even back to when we talked about, I think in our very first episode, about the Lincoln Film Studio and with George Noble, and how he was the head of this studio. He was using his money from being a Black or an Arab actor in studio films to fund and finance these Black films even before Oscar Michaud. And essentially the studio said, no, you either work for us as the token Black or you can go do your studio. He thought he would be able to manage both, but he chose the studio, and Lincoln Pictures, went under shortly thereafter. They are always asking us to make the choice. And I think that that's what excites me about a Dave Chappelle choice. Like, he walked away from that choice.
Right.
And prove that he could keep doing it. So now they're in the process of both trying to cancel and enlist him at the same time right now, which is an interesting thing to see.
Oh, it gets complicated. And there's there's an interesting thread here too, where the script is very lightly written, and she left a lot of places for experimentation in the script, but the story is very solid. And I think one of the kind of genius places in this story is that it mirrors what's happening in Faye Richards' time with her own time in the current day. So she's dating a white woman. She has this documentary project. The white woman gets on board. She's like, oh, I'm from privilege. I got money. I got contacts. Let me see how I can help you, up until she starts co-opting her projects, right? And Cheryl got her whole little friend group around her. She got all her sister girls that's like, so this white girl, what? And she gonna do what? Oh, this seemed a little funny, but we always are making these kind of like concessions. And I am not, I've done it before a couple of times in my life, but I've been burnt pretty much every single one, to understand their whole tactic is to, and I say the industry and those who are the heads and providers of the industry, right? Their whole tactic is to take out the competition. Right. And to take out the competition is to give you the idea that you are somehow a part of the thing, as we remove any of the credit or any of your connection to the thing. But we paid you though. But you got in the room. You got to sit at the table. What you made your little decisions. We took your opinion. We heard the same thing with Sidewalk Stories. We heard the same thing with Cooley High. We heard all these ways that this like compromise and concession has happened. And then in Faye Richards' story, she has a white woman who she's having an affair with, and that white woman is a famous director, and this director is kind of giving her acting roles and helping her get in. But as we see, the director's name is on all the stuff, right? And Faye's name is on none of the stuff. And
this also connects to our conversation with Takashi Buford, where Kate Lanier was this Negro whisperer. And so he gets fired from the project, and she's doing rewrites, but the project now lists in the world as is written by Kate Lanier.
And that happens quite often. That is not an unusual billing for the last writer to be the writer that is credited for the project, and the first writer to be the one way down at the list. So you oftentimes, which is I hope what this series is doing, you have to do your research. It's very important to do all that nerdy stuff where you buy random books, you download random papers or go into old obscure MySpace forums to understand who, what, when, where, why, and how. And Takashi Buford's name is at the bottom of the list, and he is the one who has the core understanding of why Set It Off is Set It Off versus whatever that woman's name is. See, I'm doing it too. I've lost credit for the white woman at the end of the script.
Right. So there's this way in which, we've got Google now, but Google is directing us to who it wants to direct us to about what the story is, what the history is, and we can't accept that. And because so many of our writers' works are not archived, out of print, you have to dig way, way deeper to find out what is the true story. And I say that it's just like a little instinct. It's a little spidey sense.
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes you will look at something and that's what it was for me with Set It Off. It was like, I watched that when I saw a white woman.
That's not a white woman.
That did not make no sense to me. And I wanted to speak to the man because I didn't feel like I could get anything from any research about why there was a white woman's name on them. My just gut said, no, a white woman don't know the truth of this. So let's get back to Watermelon Woman and Cheryl Dunye showing us in a film her own life and what happened with Faye Richards.
Yeah, and I think also, this relates a lot to that thing, right? Because her whole film is about the way that Faye Richards has been erased. So all the things that you are saying, she shows us in these different scenes, right? She goes to the lesbian feminist queer archive, right? And she goes to like pull all these pieces of Faye Richards information and photos out, and and they just dump a box on her that's not kept well, you know, it's dusty, the pictures are stuck together, and all the white woman stuff is like perfectly on the shelves and all neat, and the woman that they're talking to is just like, here, I don't know, nobody's looked in this forever, right? But that's where the archive is held. So she's constantly taking us through these pieces. And also I wanted to make a point here also that the thing she's talking about is who holds the history, right? And never to give validity to the first history that you're fed, right? So she goes through to kind of tear apart this history that she has in the books, but then also she asks a couple of people, and you know, everybody has like a different history, and so she's kind of piecing together the history of who Faye Richards was. Was Faye Richards lesbian? Was she not? Was she sleeping with this white woman? You know, she goes to the white woman's sister, and the sister's like, oh no, my sister wasn't lesbian. Oh no, she was not sleeping with no Negroes, you know? So it has to be our work and our interest and our passion to do this kind of memory work, to understand that memory is a lot of truth and a lot of perspectives and a lot of realities coming together. And that's the beauty of her film, I think.
And then we have to think about, you know, one of the things I found out was that they were unable to afford the records in the Library of Congress. So they had to actually recreate certain images and videos in the style of the time, because when our archives are held by certain, you know, creators of it, then we no longer have access to it. You know, people often don't know that when you decide to give your records to a university, you are often giving up your own right to access those records again. So we have to think about who we choose to have our archives and what do we want to put in the documents about those archives. We want to make sure that our people can have access to those original records for all time. Like we have to set that. We can't assume that the gatekeepers aren't going to just make sure that that version of history no longer exists.
100%. And I love the also piece of her film where, you know, the record is held within us. So she has to go back to people that hung out with Faye. Our people, Black people who remember her, they gave her a name. They told you what she looked like, what she acted like, what her personality was like, what she wanted to do, what her passions were, what her dreams were. She went to her mama. She went to her mama's friends. She went to people who danced with Faye and hung out in the back in the day lesbian clubs. Like there's a sense that we also don't always trust our own memory and trust ourselves to record, but yet we are the best machine that has ever existed. And so we must do that. Like we must go, and even talking even about Cheryl Dunye's film, right? A film that came out in 1996, a film that went to Berlin, a film that got an award in Berlin, but still it took about 10 to 15 years, I would say about 15 years, for this film to really come out and recognize for what it was. And it really had its really big, you know, spread when Criterion put it in 2020. That's when the majority of the people get to really see how fabulous this film is. But for the most part, it's an art house film. It's an underground film. Also, because it's lesbian queer, it's not within the same, you know, center circle and center space as all the other heterosexual filmmakers. So, and the content and all that kind of stuff. So there's so much about this film that was kind of marginalized for a number of years to get to where we are, just because.
We have to say though, she did have an anointing. I think she got a grant from the NEA. Yes. So, you know, when you get a little establishment recognition, that does open some doors for you.
But then what happens with the NEA grant? So she gets the NEA grant, and then she spends, you know, pretty much, and it's not just her. We have a number of, and we've talked about this before in the Black Feminist Protest series, but you have a number of films at that time that are coming out. So not just 1996 as being one of the greatest times of, you know, kind of my cultural time, my Generation X time, but it is a great time for so many other marginalized cultures, especially gay and queer culture. So you have all these films coming out that are underground, art house, you know, kind of on the margins, but there's a number of them coming out. And all of a sudden the NEA is getting a little uptight, particularly with Cheryl Dunye's film in her lesbian sex scene, which if you've seen that sex scene, you'd be like, this is like softcore erotica. It's not even porn. You can't even put porn on this. This is just but like a little
miscegenation is going on. Miscegenation is still some miscegenation.
And that is the hugest piece. So they're not just upset that the NEA has given a grant to this lesbian scene, but the NEA has given a film grant to a lesbian mixed scene with a white woman and a Black woman. And that becomes a hell no, oh no, let's get this money back, and starts this whole proceeding where the NEA completely restructures the way they give grants. I think it's Cheryl Dunye's film, it's Tongues Untied, and it's another film, it's a whole slew of, it's Todd Haynes films. There's a whole, like, obviously Andy Warhol and all the things he did, there's a whole thing, but particularly her film is named. Right, her little film is named, and her little film ends up having to figure out how this $35,000. Her film is about $300,000 in total, but the $35,000 is what started her off. And once you get that NEA grant, like Tonya said, you can kind of be like, well, I got an NEA grant, give me more money, give me more money. And so that really starts her off. But now they want to take it back, and they completely restructure all of NEA grants so that no longer individual artists can get that grant. You have to go through arts organization or some kind of 501(c) to get that grant. So then you have to be vetted. You have to be vetted by one of their people before you can even get access anymore. Right. And then you have to be vetted again by the NEA, right? So now it becomes harder for individual little filmmakers to get that grant, because remember, she's a student filmmaker at this time. She's in her master's program, but she's still a student filmmaker. She's made a couple shorts, but this is her big thing. So how do you get recognized by those big institutions now? And how do you get something that really draws people's attention anymore, right? Like if you get an NEA grant or a Guggenheim or one of these things, people are like, oh, okay, hold on. I see you have been recognized by the big institution. That doesn't happen anymore. And even the funding for the NEA has really deferred, because now you have all this administration fee, right? Because you have these big organizations that then have to give out this money, and they take a little piece because they have administration fees, and they give you less of the actual money. So again, why is grant funding in the United States fucked up? Because we have very conservative, archaic views around how we want to grant arts and what we feel is art and what we feel is not art.
And still, we're often in a way more liberal than some of the other countries in the world, where, you know, you can write something and end up in jail, or they actually fund artists, like in Canada and in England. So, you know, there's this balance of there's good and bad in whatever way you go. There's no ideal version of anything. There are costs to everything. If you're going to invest in yourself and take all the risk, or you're going to get some help from somebody else and be obligated to them, or risk disappointing them, risk getting on the wrong list, or end up being on a leash. So there's just choices you have to make about what is right for you in the particular moment of your artistry.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is from the movie The Master, which is like, everybody serves a master. You just have to figure out which master you serve. And I like serving the master that's about my height, got about the same eye color and hair color. You know what I'm saying? Like, I like serving me as my master. That means that a lot of shit doesn't look or happen in the way that is fast, right? Or that is acceptable to the mass or in the center space at all. But I very much like looking Maria in the eye and being like, okay, I'm gonna do it. You know, okay, I'm gonna serve you today, Maria. That I like doing that, but that's not always the dream, right? That wasn't always my dream. My dream was Sundance at one point. My dream was red carpets and, you know, whatever, you know, big fancy dresses at some point in my life. And so that wasn't, I realized quickly that master was very hard to serve to get to that point. You know, it was a lot of concessions, but I agreed on all points. I just want to say in San Francisco, we're particularly dealing with this issue around arts, but particularly in film and film funding. And we have lost basically all public institutions that have a film program. So our major one would be SF MoMA, and they just cut it last month. So we had like a big protest and fought them tooth and nail, but they in some like sly way, you know, did a board vote and just decided they didn't want to support film. And so it just comes to like a conclusion of like, so how are you like one of the quote unquote, your words, greatest cities in the world, and you don't have a public film program? You don't have a place where people can go to see film. That there's something here that doesn't make sense. And so I think we have to really have a conversation with ourselves about, and I'm totally fine if I can find the money on my own, right? I don't give a shit if it's at MoMA or not, but at the same time, don't make yourself seem, and then they did this brand thing where now they're connected with brands, and their film program is like North Face is now the brand sponsor of it. Now we just go to SF MoMA to watch North Face videos. You know?
Interesting that you say this, because I was listening to an interview that Cheryl Dunye had, and she'd been asked like what motivated her to make her film. And she talked about going to a screening that Spike Lee was in Philly. And I you know, I like Spike Lee as a filmmaker, but this particular answer to a question made me go, okay, Spike, I'm like with you, Spike. It was about She's Gotta Have It. And there apparently, that I wasn't even aware of, was a lot of protest from women, from queer women, about statements in the film, about the sexualization of her in the film. And she said there was like a line of women there to like chastise Spike. And someone finally said to him, so, you know, why did you, you know, create her as this just sexualized creature? And why did you say that? And he said, well, because it's my film, and that's the way I wanted to characterize her. And if you want to characterize women in another way, then you should go make a film that does that. And I was like, yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
Totally.
And what you're saying is the institutions have realized, especially with the technology getting to be so inexpensive, that people can get up and they can make a film with a cell phone now.
Right.
They can make a 4K film with a cell phone. And film is this great propaganda document. Totally. The film and the government are intricately connected with one another. The Marvel films and the military is financing them. So when people see a film, it gives them images of what is possible in the world, of who they can be, of what they can think. And if the government gives up their control of that, who knows what the world would look like? So of course the government doesn't want to fund people putting out ideas that they think they can't manage those ideas. Miscegenation between, lesbians.
Or just even that lesbians and queer people exist and have a place within society, right? We want to keep regurgitating this idea that they're on the margins of society. Something about it is backwards or not accepted. We want people to still have weirdness and othering of this culture. And they do the same thing to Black folks, you know, they do the same thing to Native folks. And if you're an other that is against whatever two-parent home, you know, heterosexual, blah, 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 whatever the ideal conservative view is, like, that's what we'll keep trying to teach the people to accept and trying to achieve. And even if trying to achieve that, it's crazy when what is the divorce rate now in the US? Like, you know, but we'll keep shoving it down people's throat what the American dream is through movies. And we'll make it your fault that you don't achieve the American dream, right?
Right. So Cheryl,
you just aren't serving the right master. That's why you're not achieving it.
and let's just think that is actually a very center point of evangelicalism.
Yes,
they believe that there is the Father, God, and that the Father in the home is the sort of divine connection to the Father God. And that if your life doesn't look like the American dream life, if you are homeless or poor or incarcerated, it is because you didn't have that Father God to guide you. And also you don't have the divine anointing of God, and this is what is the life you're supposed to have, because if God really cared about you, your life wouldn't look like that. I mean, they make up these machinations to tell. I'm gonna quote Dave Chappelle. Like, I think that settler colonialism makes up words and definitions to win arguments more than any other group on the planet.
And, you know, I want to just shout out Kathleen Collins here. If you have not gotten a chance to watch Kathleen Collins' masterclass, here is the person who talks about this whole idea of, you know, the self and the psyche, and how much settler colonialism, but also how much our Christianity and our ideas of, you know, the Father, the Mother, the Holy Spirit, all these ideas are kind of against our own core being. And part of it is to unlearn it for yourselves and figure out what your higher source is, where your core source is, who your master is. Like, all these things you have to figure out for yourself, and you don't really figure them out externally. And especially as a filmmaker, right? Like, because filmmaking is not just about the propaganda machine of society and politics, but it's also about the propaganda machine of spirituality, right? If your power source is not within yourself, right, as a woman, as a lesbian, as a person of immigrant parents, or whatever it is, if you can't find any kind of power within those structures, it's very difficult for you to like articulate yourself on screen. And you're always articulating someone else's vision for you, which we keep saying again and again, like, whose imagination is it? Is it my imagination, or is it someone else's imagination of me? And you can understand how one becomes problematic versus the other.
And I think that this brings me to Get Out, and what makes Get Out genius on a level that I don't even know that Jordan Peele was aware of as he did, because Get Out is the history of settler colonial capitalism.
Yes.
They want to put their skin on top of what everybody else does.
Right.
You know, the Washington Monument, which is just a model of the 3,000-year-old obelisk at Atum. So all of settler colonial capitalism is white identified people putting their skin over other cultures. And to me, that is where Get Out can be used to describe Hamilton. That is just white ancestors getting to occupy Black and brown bodies. You can find it in everything.
Yes. And I just want to say that is why we have the power of cinema, because you can use cinema to really articulate these complex things without even knowing quite if you're doing it right, because whatever the fuck that means, right? Here you have a Watermelon Woman that's doing a documentary narrative, and your documentary part is even fictional, because really you don't have enough archive to even tell the story that is there to tell. And you don't want to get into a huge discussion with anybody about whether or not what you have found out in your own research is true or not, because it has not been donned true by the academy or whoever the hell tells you your truth is your truth. So here she takes something complex to put together a whole understanding of early cinema of Black folks in film, but also early cinema of queer folks, right? And early cinema of Black queer folks. Goodness, how much is she digging into these crepes right now? And you can only do that in cinema. You can do pieces of it in other forms, but I've said this before, that cinema is an amalgamation of all the art forms. That's why it's really called the 7 arts, because we pull from the theater, we pull from sound and music, we pull from performance art, we pull from painting, sculpture, we pull from the metaphysical. You know, all these things come together. And there's parts in her film. My favorite part of her film is the one where they're just dancing on the roof. It's just her and her girlfriend for no reason. It has no narrative connection, really, just a utter piece of Black joy with 2 Black women. But spiritually, I connect to it. I'm like, yes, we needed this whole dance session really quick, right?
And I think that connects to movement and memory for us as people of the global diaspora. I was having a conversation with some academic women yesterday, and Zama Dubé and Africa Brown, and each of them were talking about how when they get into a tight spot, and we were specifically dealing with academia and being a Black woman in academia, they just have to go put on some music and dance. That there is something spiritual in dance. And there's a documentary that I hope gets worldwide distribution called Uprooted: The History of Jazz Dance, which takes jazz dance back to the continent of Africa. And in there, Debbie Allen talks about dance as the first communication and language, that people get up and move their body and it can tell whole stories. It can tell you everything. And so putting that in there is a connection to our ancestral line.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think
the global, I just want to say the global minority, that's not really their, that's not really a cultural form for them. So you can't really imagine them putting that in a movie except for comic relief.
Oh, and that's so sad, isn't it? Right? Like, take your shit seriously, right? Take your body and self and spiritual practice seriously, but neither here nor there. The one thing I do want to say is the other thing that I noticed in this rewatch is that she's also showing this particular thing that the white folks are erasing themselves also, right? Like part of this like practice in America is to assimilate, right? So even the white person, the couple of white people in the movie aren't connecting to the white woman who's the director. They're not connecting to what her true history is. They've already created a story and a narrative, and that's the only thing they want to push. They don't want any evidence that shows anything different, and they don't want any evidence to come to light because they're not concerned with her full self being presented, as though, you know, folks of color, we're very much in this kind of like, no, we done had enough erasure. We would like our full selves. And that's what the act of us doing the art and the cinema is about, putting a full self up to
and
show.
a full self in its complicatedness, in its shadow and its light. We're not trying, not all of us, I mean, there are, you know, many of us as artists, we're trying to explore and seek both self-acceptance and world acceptance for us and our complicatedness. Lisa Thompson at UT Austin said that as an educator, she's trying to also uplift the blue collar worker, that we don't all have to be magical Negroes, the talented 10, that there is great wealth and power in everyday, ordinary Black people, which is what I loved about Our Mother's Gardens, is that we were just seeing just our everyday Black women, mothers, sisters, aunts, nieces, dressed up glamorously, telling their stories and ennobled.
I mean, yes, and yes. And again, this is why we have to serve a master that we choose to serve so that we can do our best work, right? And I feel like, and Cheryl talks about this, if you get a chance, please do, you know, just look up a few places where you get to see Cheryl talk about her journey, because I would say that even though right now we see Cheryl and she might be, I think she's like the showrunner for like Queen Sugar and a bunch of other shows. And I think she's connected to, you know, a couple of films that are trying to come out soon, but she had a long kind of history or kind of like period where she had made this film, she had a little bit of success, and I think she got a Hollywood film, I can't remember the name of it, and it didn't do so well. So then she kind of like,
Inside.
What was it called?
Stranger Inside, that I think was Yolanda Ross got the Gotham Award for. Is that the one she got an Independent Spirit nomination for?
Ooh,
one about Black women incarcerated and stuff.
Oh no, this one, it was a Hollywood film. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. I think hold on, oh, I'm not gonna find it.
Don't worry about it.
Oh wait, that's Teddy Award winners. That's why I'm not finding it. But she had this Hollywood film, same thing like Sidewalk Stories. She had a Hollywood film. It didn't do well. You know, once you get your Hollywood chance and you ain't doing box office, you know, they gonna pretty mad at you and you don't get a lot of opportunities. So she kind of disconnected for a while from Hollywood and went to Amsterdam and kind of spent a couple years in, I think, some kind of Amsterdam fellowship program and figured out her next piece. Like, remember, she is also a person coming out of graduate school. She's very much interested in the beginning history of Black queer folks within cinema. So she kind of continues that. And that's where a lot of the films that Tonya mentioned are a part of that kind of research. So she made a few short films that were further kind of investigating this topic for her. And then she was back maybe like 5 years, 10 years later to Hollywood to figure out like what's up now that I figured out some stuff and where I want to be and how I want to play, what's up and where do I fit in, you know, because we still got to pay the bills. So I think it's really interesting just to listen to her talk, because I think we all think sometimes when we're not in it that it's like the straight trajectory and that you can't loop back to it. I think there's always an opportunity to loop back to Hollywood because that shit ain't going nowhere. It's always here. I think it was The Stranger Inside is the movie.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about. That's it. Okay. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, not Strange. My Baby's Daddy with
Oh, that was the Hollywood one. They wanted her to make My Baby's Daddy. Okay.
Yeah, with Lonnie, Dominic.
Oh,
who are the people in this one? She has some pretty big people, I think. Yeah, Eddie Griffin starred in it. Method Man, Baleen, Amy Sedaris. You know, there's a big Hollywood
movie. You know, someone was talking about an interview with Ice Cube where they were asking him why there weren't strong women in some of his films, and what they said is, he said, you know, in order to get this Hollywood money to make a movie, I have to make the movies that Hollywood will promote and think they can make money off of, and then maybe down the line. And you know, that's a choice. I mean, I don't think there's any wrong choices. I feel like whatever's put in your heart is the way you got to go, and nobody else has to like the choice you make. As long as you can live with it, that's the choice you need to make.
Right. And I think, you know, even though this is a conversation about Black folks in film, I think it does do us some like good to like look at the bigger picture, because you look at people like Soderbergh, who does his Hollywood film, and then he goes off and does his underground independent film. So I think these are not choices that only we have to make. It's the way the industry is set up. It's just those choices are a lot harsher for us than they are for white folks, and especially white cis men. So we have to say like, all right, if I'm going to make this Hollywood film, where's your indie film? Where's your $1 million film? Is your script ready? Like Takashi Buford said, 4 scripts. You got to throw 4 scripts at him to figure out which one of the one that Hollywood wants to pick, because they're in the position of power. They're in the position of money and economics. So that's cool. Do a Hollywood film, but don't get run over by Hollywood. Figure out a way to still do your own thing if we can throw any. And I'm still learning too. I'm telling y'all, like, I know I'm still learning how to do it.
I mean, hopefully we are all going to be learning forever and ever and ever. Right. And I feel like what we are doing in creating this video is this archive of people who were actually involved in it in a moment in time, so that in the future, people can come back and go, oh, I can see and hear someone who was actually doing it, not only doing it, but thinking about it and engaging intellectually, creatively with the people who had come before them. You know, I'm in the midst of writing a movie making memoir about Red Pill. And I realized, and I say in the book, maybe I'm, you know, making myself obsolete, because so much of capitalism is about people making money, interpreting and talking about what other people did. And I'm like, you know what? I need to tell you what I was doing before everybody else does the interpretation of what we are doing, because that is so much of what capitalism is.
Right. No, I think it's super smart. I think that's all super smart. Yeah, more of that. You took the anti-capitalism class like I did too.
Yeah, that was a good class.
Super good class. And the thing I think about quite often is that, you know, you can either be in the matrix or you can be outside of the matrix, right? but there's an interesting thing of if you create anything outside of the matrix, it disrupts the matrix. So even if you create any kind of just direct payment link, right? Like your film is on your YouTube page, they pay you directly, or your film is on your website, or you still selling DVDs out of your trunk, that disrupts the matrix. And just remember how hip hop started. Remember how jazz started. Remember when we were showing, you know, little race films in little bars or whatever of our own. Anytime Black folks create something outside of the matrix, any kind of direct payment loop, it always gets somehow taken over, and you know, people just jump on it. So I think don't forget that. You know, remember ways to pay yourself or to create other forms. There's other economies that can exist. There are definitely other economies that exist, but we can create our own economies, even if it's an economy of one, you know?
And as Lauren Ruffin of Crux was saying, that this pandemic has brought more Black people into online businesses ever. And that in the coming decade, we are going to over-index in online business. And so she's in the process of trying to figure out how does she turn that into something that we can get financing from banks about, because currently you can't get a loan to capitalize your online business. And so but
unless your online business is YouTube, Facebook,
Instagram. Right. But just, you know, our mom and
they just meant us. They just meant we can't capitalize.
Right. Our mom and pop's businesses have not been certified by them as being credit worthy, in much the same ways that when the Chinese were brought in to take the place after the end of enslavement, they were brought in to take over, you know, essentially to be the new slaves, to undercut Black people. And the Chinese people was like, oh, hell the fuck no, we're not doing this work. But what the Chinese realized was that Black people couldn't get loans and they could. And so that was what really allowed them to open businesses in Black communities, because they realized we were this population that had money to spend, and we were being shut out of business opportunities because of Jim Crow. So they took advantage of that as a business opportunity.
Wow. Something that we should all be taking notes on and figure out how, and I also think, like, you know, for cinema, I know it becomes really just daunting trying to figure out how to be in a business, how to be an artist, how to be a creative, all these things all at the same time. But I really do push people to figure out the business, right? Like, even if it's just you, a website, and you know, a video with your good friend to talk about crazy movies, and you guys figure out donations, payment, I mean, anything, just figure out some kind of business to the thing that you do, figure out a way to get paid, and not just the big studio money, the individual money, right?
Okay.
So before we go, I do want to just really like nail in the coffin here that, you know, Cheryl Dunye is a pioneer, and a pioneer of queer cinema. And I know her name is rung in these streets, but it can't be rung loud enough to talk about this Black woman who has done this really amazing work to get us, you know, to the level we are right now. Like Moonlight probably doesn't happen because Watermelon Woman, right? Like those movies are very much linked and connected to understand how we're showing queer Black life on screen, and not just for this interview, but how even we are reflecting our lives of queer Black people on screen and how we see ourselves on screen. So I just really want to say she did a lot here in one movie in 1996. Go see this movie.
Yes. Thank you so much, Maria. And
there's one other thing that I just want to mention. I forgot to mention it last time. This book. So this book has particularly the script for Sidewalk Stories is in it.
Okay.
So I wanted to tell people to go read this book. And there's some other really great scripts that Kathleen Collins' Losing Ground script is in here too. Every script in here is pretty amazing, but you know, these two people are some of my favorites in this book.
And so Kathleen Collins masterclass, is there some place where people can see this masterclass?
Yeah, just type in Kathleen Collins masterclass. You'll see it's a Vimeo link. I think it's put up by Kino Lorber or something like that. It's free. It's free. Can I say that again? It's free. It's about an hour and some change. And literally, I think it's a class at Howard in maybe the 80s or maybe early 90s. I think it's late 80s. It's the best class you'll ever get in cinema. Like every time I recommend it, I literally watch it a couple times a year just because it's so dense. And the way she thinks is really, really, really dense. You know, she's a philosophy kind of religious major is her kind of master's before she became a cinema major. So she's just a really dense, smarty, arty type of person. So you got to watch it over and over again to understand how to write, how to think on screen, how to think within a frame. And she's an editor too. So she's also talking about editing and storytelling through editing, which I think is really important. So
I will be running to that one. That might be what I just do tonight. I love the idea.
I'm surprised I haven't recommended it to you.
Oh no, I didn't know. Yeah, I'm gonna be watching.
Did you find it? It's really easy to find.
No, I'll find it once we're done here. Thank you all for listening to us. And I'm just going to check with you. Do you have any information yet about when you will be doing your when you'll start your screening series?
Not yet, but everyone, please send me all the good vibrations to make this happen. We're just trying to make it happen. We're trying to make it happen so that we can pay people to show up and talk really good things. So money is close. It's right around the corner. This will be funded. I know it will. But 2022,
have money to keep us from doing this work because
it's not.
We're not getting paid to do this. We're showing up because we have knowledge and we can always pass that knowledge on. It's sort of like we are midwives. We are, we're being midwives and making sure that this knowledge continues and the next generation has it and has it in a firsthand experience because they're hearing it from us.
Yes, definitely. But 2022 will make a decision, yes or no, if I can't, shake money out of this tree that's supposed to give me money.
Well, what do you need? Tell us what the money, what's the amount? I like to put things out that people like because maybe someone has the resource or whatever you need to do it. What is needed in order to make this this happen so that we can have this screening? What is needed? What are the things that are needed?
So I'm thinking that we probably need around 15 grand. And that's partially money that we need to buy the licensing fees for the films. We only did that on 2 films and it was a collective, all the people that watched it just threw money in a big pot and I was able to purchase and people gave us breaks and all that. But if we want to do, which is probably like 10 screenings, I can't do the black rickety way anymore of just like giving everybody a password and we just all go out and watch it. I have to do it legitimately this time. Okay. So money for that. And then hopefully I have a great list of speakers that I would like to give honorarium fees to come in and to join the conversation with me, you, and probably Andrea too, from another, it's always good to like mix it up and have perspectives. So, but I don't want to ask anybody to show up without giving them a little bit something. This is like mostly part of my philosophy now because people call me all the time and they want screenings and they want films and they don't pay for them. So now I'm really just trying to be a real hard, steady person that just keeps saying the same thing. Great, awesome. Let me know when you got the money. Here's the budget. Here's how much it's going to cost. So people said yes to me. They love it. They just have not handed me over a check. So I don't start working until you have a check. And if I do start working, it won't be with the people connected to it. It'll just be me and I'll figure out something on my own.
And we want to honor our people's work and make sure that they get paid. I mean, people can't continue to make the work if they don't get paid for the work. I mean, especially if you are self-financing, you need to know that, in the future, since film is a piece of real estate that makes money forever, let's make sure that
that's the hugest point. And we also have to create these economic systems that don't come from just one source. And I think also what happens in programming is that we end up seeing the same films over and over again because they're easy to get. And that pipeline and access to them is much easier. And so if I want to dig into these kind of lesser known Black films, which are usually in an archive, I got to dig into this money and give somebody, you know, a whole other payment, and bring new films. Like, I mean, that's how I feel. I just feel like instead of just doing the films over and over that everybody has seen again, I really want to bring films from my list and films that we haven't seen and discussed. Was the Camille Billups film that we watched last year, Suzanne. Like, I will never get over how impactful that screening was for me.
And I wanted to see that film. So I hope that you can afford to get the licensing to get access to that film again. I also want to say that, you know, people who run archives, that cost money. Yeah. It costs money to keep something in an archive. So when we support paying for films, yes, we support that our films continue to be in existence. And then the films that are known, a lot of times the people who can afford to let you have their film for free, it's because they got paid a lot of money. Yep. At the outset. So they're not trying to make their money right now, because they got paid a chunk of money in the beginning for their licensing. So they're fine to get it out there and build a new audience because they already got paid.
Yep. And I would also say, particularly for the archives that are holding Black and marginalized films, particularly, I think we got the Camille Billups from Third Newsreel. They're folks like you and me, right, that are doing the Lord's work and keeping these films intact, preserved, and accessible, you know, and most of the money goes directly back to the filmmaker and they just take a fee. So I want to make sure that organizations like this exist and that we lift up the work that they're doing, and we continue to do that work in the future. So it sounds like I just want to screen a film. Why is it so complicated? It's complicated because I really want to do it in a right way. And once I get over this hurdle, it'll keep coming and it'll keep coming.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for listening. And I hope you will watch all of the 10 films and you can talk about them in Nubia. And thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Tonya. Bye, everyone.